It was to the lands of Portugal that the Age of Discovery began. Henrique of Portugal, also known as Prince Henry the Navigator, sponsored many voyages down the western coastline of Africa. Under his direction, a new design of manoeuvrable ships were developed. With triangular sails, the Carvel could sail much faster and further than the ships of the Mediterranean. After many expeditions, it was Bartholomew Diaz who first arrived in South Africa, establishing the first contact with the native inhabitants. The first European settlement, however, would be brought about by the Dutch East India Company. A base was set up where merchants could use the area as a station, going to and from the Dutch East Indies. Over time, the settlement known as the Cape of Good Hope grew in size and the citizens adopted the name Boer, which means farmer in Dutch and Afrikaans. In 1795, the Dutch Republic was invaded by France and was turned into a puppet state, the Batavian Republic. It was because of this the British invaded the Cape and seized control. With Napoleon's defeat in 1814, the Anglo-Dutch Treaty was signed, which returned Dutch colonies back to the Netherlands, except the Cape of Good Hope and a few South American colonies. There were now many Boers living under British rule within the colony, and there was a dominance of British culture. They felt resentment as the British did little when their farmlands were attacked by local African tribes. They also didn't like the ban on slavery, and were outraged when the Dutch language was outlawed as an administrative language. So in 1835 they embarked on the Great Trek. Tens of thousands of Dutch citizens known as voortrekkers left the Cape Colony and moved inland into Africa in the hopes of finding new lands. The journey into Africa was dangerous. They had to cross the Orange River, the Vaal River, cross over mountain ranges and avoid hostile African tribes. The rise of the Zulu kingdom under King Shaka had led to the deaths of between 1 and 5 million Africans. This massacre and fleeing migrants left large amounts of land underpopulated or uninhabited. Because of this, the Boers were able to form two new republics, the Orange Free State and the South African Republic, or Transvaal. These new republics were recognised by Britain in the 1850s, but the discovery of diamond deposits along these borders created bitter tensions. In the 1870s, the Boer states were nearing bankruptcy and were continuing to fight off neighbouring African tribes. So the Boer republics sought the protection of the British and were annexed in 1887 out of fear from being vulnerable by the Zulu. Britain continued to expand into Africa and annexed the Zulu kingdom in 1879, and after this event many Boers in Transvaal began to speak out against British rule. 10,000 soldiers then gathered under Paul Kruger and declared independence once more. The British sent troops north into Transvaal, but were ambushed and continued to take losses over the following months. This is because the British army was far less organised than the Boers. The Boers had no official army, it was instead based on a commando system. All male citizens between the ages of 16 to 60 gathered to form a militia and elected a leader. Each soldier carried a rifle, food for 8 days and acquired a horse. Many Boers were also skilled marksmen and frequently shot down many British troops in bright red uniforms. Such was the Battle of Laing's Neck, where British artillery did little to the entrenched Boers who persistently shot down British troops. The final battle came in February at Majuba Hill, where British troops climbed up to get the high ground and overlook the Boer positions. These attempts failed as the marksmen picked off the British, and when Major General Pomeroy Colley was shot down and killed, the remaining troops fled. This was Britain's first military defeat since the American War of Independence, and a treaty was signed in 1881 which recognised the Boer republics as independent. But just as the war ended, the scramble for Africa began. Other European powers like Germany, Italy, France and Portugal moved in to colonise the continent, threatening British dominance in South Africa. The republics launched incursions into modern-day Botswana, but the British were quick to annex the area as well as modern-day Zimbabwe. Gold was discovered in Transvaal that improved the economy so much it started to rival the British. The British helped organise a rebellion in Transvaal known as the Jameson Raid. This failed and encouraged the republics to import more firearms. What made things worse was Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, who sent a telegram congratulating the Boers on their independence. This did not help Anglo-German relations in the build-up to World War I, and Britain feared a German-Boer alliance. Feeling their position was threatened, troops were built up along the border in 1899, and when the Boers sent an ultimatum to withdraw, war was declared. In the early stages of the Second Boer War, Britain were unprepared again. This allowed the Boers to win several victories at Ladysmith, Mafeking and Kimberley. But by 1900, hundreds of thousands of soldiers arrived to relieve these cities, and they continued to push forward, eventually capturing Johannesburg. However, a guerrilla war was launched by de la Rey, and over 250,000 British troops failed to maintain control. Because of this, the British built thousands of outposts throughout South Africa to defend supply lines and burned crops and villages that could have aided the guerrillas. Those who were captured were deported to other colonies within the empire, like St Helena and the Caribbean. The women and children faced a far worse punishment, as many were placed into concentration camps. The conditions in these concentration camps were so poor, as many as 40,000 died from starvation and disease. The raids of the Boers lessened, and there was concern that the neighbouring Swazi tribe would soon join the war. The war came to an end in 1902. Peace was made and the Boer republics were annexed. The wars have left an incredible mark on South Africa, a deep cut in its history, and should not soon be forgotten.